For lots of us, when we have a time of prayer, we might be naming various people who are close to us. Maybe it's grandparents, parents, our siblings. We might even extend our prayer to those that we work with in our workplace, maybe our local church, certainly a good focus for prayer. But what about praying for others? I mean, the Bible calls us to pray for our leaders, but what about not just politicians, but pop stars, rock stars and celebrities? Well, something a little different, I guess, today. Bill Muehlenberg has been writing about a couple of his favourite rock stars, Mick Jagger and Paul McCartney. Hey, Bill Muehlenberg, welcome back to 2020.
Many thanks.
Bill, do you get sometimes the thought that, I might be embarrassed to say that one of my favourite rock stars was Mick Jagger or Paul McCartney? How do you reflect on that?
Oh, well, it certainly tells everyone how old I am, obviously, ancient of days and all that. Well, I mean, I got saved in 1971, so if you know some of this prehistoric history, both the Beatles and the Rolling Stones came out, well, really early in the 60s, and really, well, by the mid-60s, were really making it big time, and the rest is history, 60 years for each. Of course, the Beatles broke up 1970. Two of them are now dead. The Stones are still going, but, you know, they've had a few. Brian Jones, the original guitarist, died of drugs, age 27, 1969. So that was all my history, certainly for the first decade or so. As a non-Christian, I followed both groups and others. Maybe not as much now for the last 50, 60 years, but hard not to be aware of both of them, right? And I guess, Paul is coming to town pretty soon, coming to Australia. So I hear you even might be considering having a look.
Well, I did give it some consideration. You just never know. He is coming to a stadium near me, and he's not getting any younger, as you say, and so many of us, our listeners, grew up with a lot of their music. And so as you talk about some of the biggest names in the world, certainly you'd be adding Paul McCartney, and you'd add Mick Jagger into there as some of the biggest names in the history of modern music. But interestingly, Bill, I'm sure that most of us probably tend not to pray for our pop star, rock star idols. That's an interesting word to use too as a Christian believer, but you've added these to your prayer list, and you've got a prayer list, and you add some names to it, and they're on it. Why are they on there?
Yes. Well, I should explain a bit. I mean, there can be a wrong legalism where people say you have to pray and read the Bible first thing in the morning. Well, I tend to read the Bible in the morning, but for some reason my prayer time is in the evening, actually, when I go to bed. Now, if you are the kind of guy who goes to bed and 2 seconds later you're asleep, you probably shouldn't do your prayer time when you're in bed. Unfortunately, I'm not one of those guys. I usually toss and turn an hour or two every night before I even get close. So for me, praying is fine. And the other night I did go through my list, and it's diverse. Obviously, if you have a list, it's family and friends, loved ones. But I've got all kinds of folks I've added over the years so that every day somebody like Jordan Peterson is being prayed for. Maybe I shouldn't drop names, but I had a coffee with Lyle Shoughton not long ago, and I mentioned that to him, and he was, oh, really? Elon Musk, I pray for daily. Trump, DeSantis, obviously politicians, leaders, I pray for. Some celebs I've been doing a while. Woody Allen, I think he's an interesting character, Jewish fellow. Bob Dylan, another guy, Jewish, who had a Christian fling at least. So, anyway, I did my prayer the other night and then tossing and turning, thinking. So I don't know how I got on to Paul and Mick. As I say, they are coming, at least Paul is coming to Australia. And I was thinking, wow, they got to be getting old for one, right? I mean, they were a bit older than I, and I'm getting older. So the next day I did a bit of looking around, one, just to see exactly how old they are. And if you're old like us and you grew up with these guys, this could be a bit of a shock. But Paul is 81 and Mick is 80. That's getting pretty old. You see the guys jumping on the stage doing all their thing. I don't know, maybe if you go to the concert, Neil, maybe Paul will be wheeled out in a wheelchair. Who knows? I mean, how long can you keep going? I know some of these guys like Mick exercise a lot, try to keep in shape. But hey, 80s is a bit much. So anyways, I looked that up, and I looked up some other things. I thought these guys got to be stinking rich, right? So I looked up the worth of each one. And the figures were pretty shocking that I did come up with. Mick Jagger worth about $500 million. Not to be outdone, Paul, $1.2 billion. That's a lot of dough. That's a lot of money. So anyways, I wrote an article about a bunch of things. One, we can pray for these guys. Two, they've lived the life of Riley. They've lived great lives, right? What are you going to do when you got $1 billion? Certainly early on, the parties, sex, rock and roll, drugs, they would have been up to their head in all this stuff. So a lot of people would think, oh, wow, they've lived the good life. They've had an exciting good life. But obviously we're Christians, so we think, yeah, well, but as Jesus said, what does it profit a man or benefit a man? He gained the whole world, but he loses his own soul. So I looked at the spiritual element here as well of praying for these guys.
So we all might have a favourite pop star, rock star or two that we might have followed over many years. And so the simple addition to a prayer list, you could even create a separate prayer list, couldn't you? The celebrity prayer list, because interestingly, it's likely that because celebrities appear on our screens or in our ears, or we've collected an album, they don't necessarily always relate to being that personal that we might think that we ought to pray for them. But certainly creating a celebrity prayer list might be something that might be a new thought for a lot of people listening to our conversation today.
Yeah, well, I'm presuming with millions, if not billions of people being aware of these two, hopefully there's some Christians already praying, but yeah. The idea that we can go beyond our circle of friends and family, and again, politicians, celebrities, any number of people could be a head of a corporation, right? Alan Joyce left Qantas. I don't know how many Christians have prayed for him over the years. So, yeah, there's always an expansion of those who we can pray for. Now, if you're worried your list is going to grow exponentially and you're going to take 3 hours a day just to go through the list, well, the good news is, if you're like me, right, I'm old. So a lot of the guys I'm praying for are old. So guess what? Sadly, some of them pass away, right? So you take them off your list. So even though I'm always adding new people, some of the older ones I have to take off my list. Mind you, it's just in my head. I don't have a written list, but some people may want to have a written list. And as you say, different categories, friends, family, your pastor, rock stars, whatever. So yeah, even it's a short prayer. I say, Lord, let Mick and Paul, maybe for the first time in their life, think about you. No, I don't know where they're at. I have heard nothing about them being Christians or becoming Christians, but again, they're old, right? One of these days, soon, we're going to get a headline, Mick Jagger dead at 83 or whatever, right? So these guys got to start thinking fast if they haven't. Am I ready for eternity? What have I done with my life? Yes, I've had millions of screaming fans who, as you say, idolize me, worship me, adore me. But actually, the real issue is the God of the universe somebody that you adore and worship? So that's the kind of stuff you can pray. And again, I can do it in a minute easy for some of these guys. So you can do quite a few people in, say, 20 minutes, whatever. But yeah, they need prayer just like anybody else. They've had the good life, and it's going to be a not so good life if they don't change. So yeah, just a reminder, we all need to pray. We all need to pray more often, and there's probably a lot more people we can think of praying for.
I picked up a great prayer tip from a guest on 2020 some years ago, and I'll share this with you, Bill, because if you've got your list, sometimes your list can get quite long. Yep. And it's interesting because there's a very, very simple prayer. And if you come from evangelical, charismatic, Pentecostal circles, you don't get exposed to this. But in a lot of mainline churches, you hear this prayer, Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy. And this has been meaningful to me just of recent times when I heard from one of our guests on 2020 that when he's praying for the big lists of people or the big circumstances around the world, he uses those words because it's often hard to know what to pray, how to pray. Lord, have mercy, Christ, have mercy. So if you think of that list of pop stars, rock stars that you might regularly hear from or listen to, or you think of the big situations, war in the Middle East or Russia, Ukraine, or famine that's striking places, bushfires that are engulfing communities. Lord, have mercy, Christ, have mercy. A good way to be a catch-all prayer. But the idea of naming individual names, Bill, that's not so bad either, because then you've got a testimony when you hear that report that they've responded to a call to come to Christ. That's the value there, isn't there? Really naming those individuals.
Yeah, that's right. And I think there's probably extremes we can avoid if we get too overly detailed, right? I think you have to pray for every person on the planet or, spend a half hour on each one. Well, you won't get very far fast. So you can abbreviate things. You can, as you say, have more collective kind of prayers now and then. But I suppose the other extreme, which doesn't help, is being overly general, overly generic, right? It's your typical, beauty pageant contest, right? The host asks one of the aspiring gals, well, what is your great wish for the world? Oh, I pray for world peace. Yeah, well, they all say that. That's the kind of the catch-all phrase, but it really helps nothing. It doesn't define anything. How are you going to get world peace, right? Anyway, so sometimes a bit of specificity in our prayers, certainly naming names, And again, I do, like I say, some of these I'll do every single night, but, maybe you can do some once a week, once a month, right? Maybe you got a daily list, a weekly list, and so on. So again, no legalism here as to how you do it. The thing is, as we say, pray often, and pray for a wider circle, perhaps, of people than you may have been used to.
Certainly praying for people that we know and love and broadening that list to pray for others. In some sense, you might feel as though praying for a celebrity might be like praying into, the never, never. But God is the one who is on the throne, and He is promising to respond to our prayers. So, the effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous person avails much. So if we're naming celebrities in there, perhaps there's some special move of God in the hearts and lives of those celebrities. Bill, I'll point people to this article that you've written this week. It's called On Mick, Paul and Prayer. Bill, a bit of a departure from our usual sorts of conversations, but hey, thanks so much for great thoughts again today on 2020.
Always a pleasure, Neil.